my homie Kev came to pick me up. We were on our way out east to go see our friends out in Philadelphia. He says, Nikolai, we got to make a stop quick. Where do we go? We go to our local Best Buy. This was, we got fake IDs while we were out there, so we were 20 years old. This was 11 years ago. We walk into Best Buy, and we go straight to the CD section, back when CDs weren't collecting dust. We pick up that new Atmosphere, When Life Gives You Lemons, Paint That Shit Gold. We listened to one album during that 19-hour trip. It was a game changer in the way underground music was created and looked at in the state of Minnesota. Tech Nine was already doing his thing. Atmosphere had been doing their thing. Their sound was a little more grimy. But this production had value to it. Eventually, the Macklemores came about. You could make as the public perceived, a DIY project and take over the world. And then we continued on our path with Rhymesayers. Started going to Soundset, year one. You'll hear us talk about it in this show. We crowd surfed a man in a wheelchair up to the front row while Brother Ali was on stage. Man, you can't take this away from us. And then, a couple years later, my 24th birthday, I got a call a couple days prior. Nick, I'm a hip-hop artist at the time, recording at IPR in Minneapolis. Hey, Nick, we have an opportunity for you down in Mankato. Have you ever heard of Prof? No. I just look him up. He's in this video, clearly in front of a green screen with a cowboy hat on, rapping. I was like, I don't know. He's from the Twin Cities? Cool. Yeah. Oh, you want me to open up for him? If I can sell 50 tickets? Well, I'll give him my all. Oh, the show's this Friday on my birthday? Yeah, I'm down. Consider it a challenge. So I ended up selling 102 tickets in a matter of 2.5 days because apparently everyone else knew who Prof was. And that was really a key jumpstart with my relationship with the team at Stop House and Rhymesayers and my man Jeff, who was able to link Skye and I up. I was a match made in heaven. This conversation was magical. I am lucky to be in the position I'm in, thankfully, because of supportive people in my life. And I follow my gut. I am someone who will take a 50-ticket challenge at face value, and I'll go run with it because you can't scare me away. And that's how I perceive Stationary Astronaut. That's how I perceive the Astral Network. That's how I perceive any opportunity that is given to me, because I truly believe in it as a gift. I take it and I run with it like Adrian Peterson in 2009. So with that being said, thank you so much to Rhymesayers, Skye Rossi, Jeff Horowitz, my man Wyatt, Dominique, everybody who has supported this journey. I feel it's turned into what we see today, where we're lucky enough to sit down and chat with the doers, the movers, the shakers in our state's economy. So with that being said, enjoy the show. This episode is brought to you by Rochester Lapidary Jewelers, your original custom jeweler. This podcast is medicated by Cato CBD. Go to catocbd.com. Use code word astronaut at checkout. Receive 10% off.
And I'm gonna be high.
That's how I'm feeling. I'm at the top of my game.
And now, the stationary astronaut.
Everything's aligned. Throw these bad boys back on. Thank you. All right, you were talking about flyover country. Dude, grab your microphone.
I'm not good at this. I'm not a performer. That's why I stay behind the camera.
So flyover country, Rochester, we were talking about still bringing these acts from, say, Rhymesayers or other companies to these flyover cities that might be forgotten about.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at Rochester as a flyover country example to many because it's like it's a smaller town. Why would I go there? But then there's this like very probably underserved market there, right? So a lot of the Rhymesayers artists that first started touring like an atmosphere of this, you go to Texas, you go to Boise, you go to these cities and these states that a lot of other folks, especially in hip hop, weren't performing. And so you just find these very young, hungry, sometimes it's Midwest, sometimes it's West or East, whatever, audiences. And so I totally hear you when you're saying that, hey, down in Rochester, we're doing these prof shows and they're just like getting crazier, steam setting off fire alarms because it's like people are probably really excited. There's not an abundance of, performances or whatever they're into in their kind of close location. They got to come up to Minneapolis. You got to go to Chicago or wherever for certain tours.
That's why I feel Tech Nine hasn't gotten the respect he deserves because he'll go to those cities.
Yeah, Tech is him and the whole Strange thing are a great example of very organized people going all across the U.S. and definitely hitting underserved markets for sure. He's winning a lot of fans for that, I'm sure.
And I think if in regards to, and Rhymesayers has always been known as this like underground conglomerate that's up there with Strange music. Would that be an accurate comparison?
I mean, I think like everyone's doing their own thing like whether from an approach standpoint, touring in that way, for sure there's a lot of similarities. I think there's a lot of the sound is their sound, right? They have their own kind of independent sound. Their artists have their own, I would say the same about ours, right? So there's kind of this whole like diaspora of hip hop, right? You've got from one side to the other. Even on our label, you've got an MF Doom, and then you've got an Atmosphere, and you've got a whole bunch of other artists that just don't necessarily fit into one space. And I'd say the same for Strange. But yeah, there's definitely a comparison in the sense of like doing a lot of the work in-house, label, management, and so on. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. And I think the interesting thing is, we were kind of originally built not necessarily out of strategy or seeing the future, but just because we had to, a 360 label, right? So you're looking at what the majors do now, where you're trying to, for revenue reasons, serve all of these needs, right? And so we were just doing it because purely there was not a lot of other industry here, and I think Strange is doing the same thing.
And what could nowadays, in the way marketing and PR goes, what could possibly be considered underground? Because everyone's trying to tap into the same vein, which is the internet.
I mean, I think the term underground, if I'm going to bring it kind of more of a modern approach, is just what's getting attention, So I think there's plenty that's not getting attention. I think underground just is, to some people, niche or whatever you want to say, subculture, right? But for underground hip hop, it's whether that's what it is or isn't. I mean, I think it's more just like what's getting attention right now. Yeah.
Preparing to come in here and speak with you, I was trying to pinpoint who Skye Rossi is.
I would love to know.
Well, I was going to ask, do you consider yourself a glue piece?
Give me a little more. Break it down.
Are you a squid that can pull a lot of pieces in and make them all play nicely?
Yeah, I like to make things happen. One of I think my goal in whatever my job is in any given week, it's to, bring the vision for our artists to light, right? Or assist them in doing that in my part. And I definitely, a thing I think I'm good at is connecting people, finding the right people to work on certain projects or assist in certain ways or whatever. I thoroughly enjoy it, and so I think where you find the intersection of what you enjoy and what you're good at, that's a really good place to be, and I think I'm there. So yeah, in a lot of ways, I like to bring certain things together to realize ideas or visions that might not be possible because of a budget constraint. There's lots of constraints on our particular business and our industry generally, right? So I think you need folks that can be out there connecting dots and bringing people together and kind of also then giving the direction and maintaining that direction through the process. Because it's one thing just to get two people in a room. It's another thing to sort of like help shepherd things through. Hey, we've been working on this for 3 months. Your initial goal was this. Did we get that? You know what I mean? So yeah, I'll take that.
And that's got to be real purpose-filling, being able to help up-and-comers kind of exponentially grow and see to it that their dreams come true in some way, shape, or form.
It definitely keeps me doing what I'm doing, for sure. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's not always wins. It's generally less of the time it's a complete win. But yeah, I think like being able to spend a lot of time helping play my part in bringing certain things to light gives a lot of purpose to the work, for sure.
Over the last 15 years,
Yeah.
I'm guessing your label has grown, seen some dirt, morphed, obviously grown legs. What would you describe it as today, 15 years later?
I'd say, like you evolve, right? You try and meet first the needs of the artist in the position that I'm in, right? Right. We have to serve that greater good of the sort of artist wants, needs, their art. So yeah, we totally evolved. I mean, you went from a label first, let's say, with, now we need to do a touring, now we need to do management, now we need to do merchandise, now we need to do this all out of our basement, or whatever it is. You just sort of like react to those things as needed. And I think that we essentially, over the last couple of years, we pivot about every 12 months.
Okay.
And it's not a complete pivot, but essentially it's like a few degrees in this direction of being, now at this point, artist management first, because a lot of the need for label is more need for team right now. I think that's a conversion. You're seeing a lot of the, whoever these, sort of younger developing and then, kind of converting into mainstream artists, right? They're doing that because they have a strong team around them. That used to be what you would call label, and now it's smaller management teams with a partnership with either a major or they're just doing the distribution direct or whatever. So I think now our evolution over the last 15 years has been from, let's say, label first to now management first, with label as a service, merchandise as a service, and then you just add on things that we're good at, or you find good partners for that. So I think there's definitely an evolution there over the last 15.
With that annual minor degree pivot, would that be like technology based? Is like new app services are coming out, or is that more so just like adding on to the team and new marketing ploys, things like that?
I think it's all of it. For the biggest part, though, is you have to just sort of understand the reason that you exist, right? And so it's an ethos, probably first. Like, wow, we're still doing this. No one cares about this. We don't need to do that. So it's like it kind of trickles down, right? It's like, what is the greatest good? Okay, so from a revenue standpoint, let's look at this. From an ability standpoint, from an investment standpoint, and then that's where you start thinking about staffing. Oh, wow, we a few years ago, we acknowledged that we need to turn out a lot more like social content, right? Very important. Visuals have always been important to us. The difference now is, instead of it just being packaging or it just being this sort of initial run, there's so many more forums for this, whether it's Instagram, et cetera. The amount of visual content that is now associated with each project is so much higher. So we just have to acknowledge that from a staffing standpoint. So it's kind of all of these things together. Does that make sense? So, but yeah, you also have to then staff for competency around these platforms. Well, okay, if YouTube monetizes in this way, well, it went from just a free marketing platform to now 10% of our digital revenue. Okay, then what do you do to support that? How do you not lose subscribers? How do you not spam? How do you now turn this into a sort of like free platform for consuming this intellectual property, right? So you got to kind of have a competency and hire for that competency as you go along. You know what I mean? You can't expect folks, unless they're interested, to follow you along that way. Yeah, so it's all of these things. And so we've built some of our own software. We use a lot of software as a service. We do all these things. But yeah, you have to, it's sort of everything, but it's kind of instructed by what is then the goal. Where do we want to be in 12 months? And then what you find out is you have to then change again and change again and change again. Music is the first media to be disrupted by technology, and it always will. It's my belief. The reason for that is because it's relatively, in the early days, it was a lot less data intensive than video, so you can actually play around with new models. Netflix didn't come around until, broadband came around, right? So you could get, MP3 files, a reasonable download, especially if you're on a college network, right? You have these things. So it's like technology disrupted music, whether it liked it or not, and I think in a lot of really wonderful ways. But it will just continue to be disrupted by tech. And so if we're in the business of music and not just, somebody that enjoys performing, because there's another side of this music thing that has nothing to do with money, right? But if we're in the business of music, we have to be able to react and respond to these things as they evolve.
I love that technology has disrupted it because it is really plucking out the true creatives in the music industry. Where Travis Scott and his tour, he took it back to home base. And with his production value that he provided, it was really on another level. And let's see here, Kanye West, was it Kanye with his tilting stage, his moving stage? Things like that are kind of the draw between whether you're going to have a really successful tour and possibly a flop. Where you're having to pull the Lil Wayne and back out of Minneapolis 4 times in 3 years,
Yeah, and we were happy to have some good people around him to make sure he showed up to Soundset
this time.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he's it's one of those things where you outline something really interesting there with technology, right? Because I think what you said is almost more of an indirect effect of technology, right? So the reason that Kanye, well, he's a very creative individual. He just wants to push boundaries, period. But I believe that the reason you're seeing these stage productions become more immersive and interesting is because that's how you market the tour, right? Because people are doing the sharing for you, but if they don't have anything interesting to take photos of or video or whatever, that's the disruption of technology, that technology applied to then the live show space, if that makes sense, right? So, I mean, there's so many ways that it's disrupted it, but that's a very interesting kind of thing that you brought up, because I think it's almost like a secondary or third way that it's been affected.
On a macro scale. Then a micro scale is the shareability, Young Thug just wearing a dress. And then all of a sudden people are just interested in this guy. Tekashi 6ix9ine and his crazy hair. Things like that. Just the shareability, it can be talked about.
Yeah.
And that's obviously, on going out of left field.
One thing you're noticing, or maybe notice, is like it was interesting. I had a conversation with an artist maybe a couple years ago. It's hard to be an asshole anymore, right? Like it's hard to have, you either are that and that's your character that you play. And there are certain people out here that are those sort of, the villains or whatever it is. And then there's here, wherever the traditional archetypes are, right? But I've noticed that a lot of artists weren't able to make that jump into the social media era, or complained a lot about it. But that wasn't necessarily social media's fault. It was the fact that their personality or who they were showed through a little bit more, because you're having deeper, longer access versus just like if somebody has to just do a press run, they have to do a rehearsed interview 15 times versus doing an Instagram live every day and talking about how they feel about this and this and this. It's just a different relationship with your fans. And so when you had like back in the whatever time pre, where internet was dominant, you'd have a lot of artists that could get away with maybe not being the best or most interesting people necessarily, but the music spoke for itself, or that's how it was packaged, that's how it was consumed. So there's a lot of really interesting ways that it affects everything. And you're really seeing it. And I think what's happening is the social media stuff allows you to it almost forces folks in some ways to either strip away these sort of filters that they had, whether it was a publicist or this or that, for on any day-to-day basis, and now their personality shows through, or you become a better actor, right? Or whatever, something like that.
And then you eventually have a crisis.
I mean, well, if you can't self-manage, you know what I mean? Yeah, for sure. Having people around me that I can trust to just bounce ideas off of and build, that's a whole sports and the attention that those spaces get and also not in Minneapolis, you know what I mean? Like as connected as we are to technology, as connected as we are in this world, there's still a different pace that happens here and in music and in our sphere of music. Like we're not pop stars. I don't think anyone that we work with necessarily aspires to be that. So it's like that's a totally different level of once you're on TMZ, it's like I'm useless in that space, personally. But yeah, it's very important to have a team around you that can, just like help. I think it's even simpler than like crisis stuff. I think it's just like having good people around you in your life. There's like that adage of the 5 people that are closest to you can physically and then emotionally show who you are as a reflection, right? So it's like, these people influence you to do that. It's the same thing with the people you do business with. It's just no different. So just from a psychological standpoint or just how we relate to other humans, it's like having these good people around you, I think inevitably bring value to then your career and help you get those goals that you want. And it's more important than ever because the cycles are shorter, the opportunities are less. We were talking even before we started recording about attention. That is, to me, the biggest challenge that anyone in the music industry faces. It's attention and it's noise, right? So we were talking about how distribution now allows anyone, technology and distribution allows almost anyone to create a song, put it up for free, let it be consumed, right? So with that, as these sort of like barriers to entry go down, there's a new barrier, which is just people being bombarded with thousands of potential. I mean, if you want, you can get thousands of new songs, every day.
When you think of kind of marketability and teamwork, you look at Billie Eilish and her situation with her brother as her producer. Talk about keeping it 100 in regards to accountability and the amount of hours they've been able to put in together. And it's paid off. And then you have like this oddity look and promotional campaign where it's kind of sinister and scary. But it works, and it's a complete project, which I'll never forget. It was in February. I was driving in L.A. We were just getting to West Hollywood, and my boys who live out there, they hadn't heard of her yet. And I was like, the Uber driver asked us, hey, what do you guys want to listen to? Billie Eilish right now, play bad guy. And this is just before it hit the airwaves like crazy. Sure enough, my guys are like, well, who's Billie Eilish? What are you talking about? Is that a girl or a guy? I was like, look at that wall, big-ass wall with Billie Eilish looking all creepy. And it goes to show where it's like you can be a Midwesterner and be more tapped in than them out west in the Mecca.
Well, it's what are you paying attention to, right? And I think that's the thing. It's an interesting thing you bring up because there's so much content being created. And now the really interesting thing to me is how do I'll maybe refer to more like a TV model for this because it's like Netflix has deep niche content now, which you never would have had that before. I'm a cupcake guy. I love cupcakes. I'm a donut guy. I love like whoever you are, there's probably a donut show where you can get in there and see those things being made, whereas to find that content previously would be very difficult. So it's almost like this potentially a more narrow band of content that you're bringing in, and you can almost get into more of like all you watch is cooking shows or something like that. Like that's a possibility now. So you knowing about Billy versus these other folks, I think that speaks to maybe the attention thing that I was describing, where it's like not everyone knows Top 40 was a thing, right? Radio was a thing. Still is for a lot of folks. It's just more of a passive listen. This is kind of how I consider it. But if you're back in the day, if you weren't on Top 40, well, it was very niche, right? There was no, like, I'm sure she does very well on tour, right? And now she's very well known. But before that, she was probably making a good living. Like an artist like Prof can make a good living. An artist like Hemisphere can make a good living. They're not on the top 40. That is possible now because of some of these like distribution models and things that we do, and these like sort of niche communities and these it's just like these very specific kind of interest spaces.
Well, think about it, man. If you don't follow the correct person on Instagram, you won't know something that the world knows at the push of a button just because you don't follow a specific person right there.
Right.
Same thing with Twitter. If you don't have a Twitter, technically, you're 12 hours behind on world news. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the news thing is very interesting with that for sure.
And I love if Lil Wayne, for instance, when he canceled on his last Target Center show, I immediately went to Twitter just to find out what the scoop was. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't go Google Lil Wayne cancels tour. I just went right to Twitter and did the same thing to find out if he showed up. This is my first sounds that I missed, and I went to Twitter to make sure he showed up.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of been an ongoing joke in a nutshell. Will Lil Wayne show up?
And that's something we take very seriously, though, with like Soundset and stuff. Is like we provide we can't control things. Do you know what I mean? People make their decisions as they do, and we've been lucky to have only a few cancellations. I can't remember the exact number. It was like 3 or 4.
Busta Rhymes, Prof stepped up.
Yeah, and so we only had like I don't know the exact number. It's like 3 or 4 folks. Over having, we have roughly 50 plus artists every year over 12 years. It's pretty good, and I think some of that is due to us providing a very like artist friendly space on site because we work with, artists. We want that to be a thing. But yeah, no, there's a lot of like, Twitter, just to get back to that, is interesting. It's almost like a news app, right? I think that's where it's kind of going because the one problem that the internet hasn't solved yet is local news. And so I think like people do go to the Nextdoor app or maybe it's Twitter to kind of get that very hyper local stuff. But I think that's a really interesting thing that Twitter is almost like becoming, having a second life or third life as that.
Yeah, I'm eager to see where it goes with like your local news platforms, how they're going to do it. Because working with some of my friends who are anchors, they get shut down left and right in regards to trying to bring new ideas to their director, and they're just so old-headed.
Oh, it's a very tough. It's got to be a tough. I don't know personally, but it's got to be a tough space to work for sure. A lot of folks refer to it as like legacy media and stuff like that. It's like, well, from a certain standpoint, it makes sense to protect. It's that struggle between like protecting your bottom line. That's something we faced, right? Do we open up to all these platforms? Do we, so for example, Facebook asks us to participate with their publishing platform, which allows our videos to then, earn publishing revenue when played. It allows our stuff, even our music. So for example, Prof, unlike other artists, for a while was able to show up in Instagram stories. Like, remember that music feature showed up in Instagram stories? We were early on that because we're just very open with these platforms, right? Whether or not the full monetization scheme is there, we fully understand what the direction is. We want our music sort of in these spaces, and so we're sort of the opposite of protectionist necessarily. You need to have some control over your IP, but in a lot of ways, like for certain platforms, it's like we want to be where the fans are, and I think that's a challenge when folks are working on like legacy media, that maybe whether it's TV or radio, it's like that's a very tough place to innovate.
About to be a ghost before too long, baby boy.
Yeah, or maybe it lives.
Well, it will.
Like CDs, we've seen the thing, like drop off from being a majority of our revenue down to a smaller percentage. But it's like there's some folks, that's just how they're going to want to listen. So I don't know how if it's interesting because I think that there might be a place for TV, less channels, less whatever. And there might be a place for radio, right? Just like you look right now, it's like Pandora is radio in a lot of ways because there's not necessarily like an on-demand choice, or you can't necessarily choose your own adventure through that. But a lot of folks really love to listen, what I would say passively, without choosing it. They like this playlist, they like that playlist, and they enjoy consuming music that way. And there's some people I think I've heard a lot of not quite millennial, just over the age of millennials, reminisce to that day of just having cable before they cut the cable and saying, "Oh man, I could just like dumb out and just browse away." It's not my thing, but I've heard people reminisce. You know, there might be a place for that. Surprisingly, you know, we'll see. But yeah, dude, much diminished.
And it's not, it will never die. It's just going to streaming and subscription based, which is okay because then guess what? We get to vote with our dollar. And that's where it's bringing the power back to the people.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't shun it away. We should really accept it, and we should accept competition because Hulu's pumping out shows, Amazon Prime is pumping out shows. We should welcome that. That way there isn't a monopoly. Nobody wants that.
No, I mean, like one of the biggest challenges we face right now is knowing the fan. Okay, like our stuff's on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, all the wherever folks are listening, but I don't know if that heavy Atmosphere Spotify listener necessarily was made aware that there's a new Atmosphere song out, right? Release Radar does a pretty good job. Discover Weekly does a pretty good job. Tend to see it, but we can't control that, you know? And so if our artists are disappointed that this song didn't perform in this way or this album didn't work in this way, there's some obstacles now because of the attention thing that we kind of brought up, where it's like, well, Spotify only has so much you as the individual streamer only have so much bandwidth, right? And listening time. So Spotify's got to deliver you what it thinks is the best. That's a problem for me, you know, because I want to make sure that you have the new Atmosphere song or you have the new Atmosphere album, and so you don't miss what we believe is compelling content, or the artists are able to, you know, ensure that you know, the 80-20 rule, right? That the 20% get that content, right? And so that's where it's like, you're right. There's a lot of democratization. There's a lot of openness. At the same time, we get better data than we used to get off radio, right? From like understanding where, how long, whatever. We still don't know those folks, right? And so that's where it's still important for us, even amongst all these other platforms, for us to also have like a direct channel if people want it that way, right?
How do you garner new while still fluff your old?
For what type of thing?
Well, garner that 80 while fluffing the 20, you know?
Oh, I mean, for us, it's keeping those barriers to entry low. It's being on these platforms. It's not gouging people when it comes to ticket prices for shows. It's creating compelling content that appeals to that broader base, right? From the visual stuff, you know, to just like open it up. And then the other thing is there's almost not a formula for that, right? I think the best, what you almost do these days is because people have so much choice, the best choice I think for an artist is to stay as authentically in their space as possible, instead of trying to appeal to X, Y, or Z, because people just see through it, right? So it's like appealing to your folks. Maybe your audience is smaller over time than it could be, but I think you see examples of bigger artists trying to produce a crossover hit or whatever you want to call it, and then their core audience is like, well, what is this? I didn't want a country song from you, or I wanted you only to do country or jazz, whatever it is, right? Like I think a lot of people can see these things as inauthentic. So I think that's like kind of a challenge when you're creating all this content. So I think you got to really just hyper serve those fans that are engaged in that, and then just staying kind of authentic to your thing. I don't know if there's like necessarily a formula, but just like, all right, let's go with our gut. Yeah. This seems like kind of a gimmick. Let's stay away from that. We've tried to stay away from like marketing gimmicks and stuff. You know what I mean? Like I would say a lot of, at least in regards to like Rhymesayers, a lot of the artists I work with, it's more of a slow, steady build than a, you know, bullet to the top kind of thing, because that tends to have a pretty sharp fall.
And that's where when you strike gold from the jump, I bring up Nelly. Okay,
Sure.
Country Grammar took over the world, and then he kind of went that country vibe route where he released that dual album, and he was just like always trying to scale up on a quicker degree instead of that slow, steady build where it was like it worked at the time. Nowadays, where there is information being passed around, data Central. If we go slow and steady, that's the marathon version instead of the sprint route, which is you end up as YL Extent, whatever their name is, like where it's you scroll down World Star, it's like just name after name after name. Yeah, it's got millions of views, but that'll be their only time ever. And like there's not going to be that longevity.
I think it's hard. I think it's very hard for younger artists, and so I get that why a lot of folks, get creative with their marketing, do a lot of things because you got to stand out, and that's a very tricky thing for a developing artist to do. They are in the toughest position in streaming. Established groups, streaming is the best thing ever that could have happened to them, ever, right? They are essentially, here's why it's the best. Guns N' Roses, Metallica, some of these very established, from whenever the worst what time was, let's say the 80s, right?
Going to
90s,
war with Napster.
Right? Well, yeah. Well, it's exactly like they went to war with Napster. Well, one of the guys at least went. Yep. But what's happening now is those folks all bought those albums in physical form and potentially a second physical form, right? Vinyl, then CD. But now they're listening on streaming. So it's just ancillary. It's additional money to them. So these established groups, probably won't say it out loud, but they are loving it. And they're just going to fight to get the rates up, which is the right thing to do. But these established artists, the difference is you used to be able to locally. I started out helping promote a lot of local groups, right? If we could sell 500 CDs, that was the best thing ever, right? 1,000 CDs, this is crazy. Hold on, 2,000-3,000 CDs, we might have something here, right? Because what you do is you get to multiply that by, if you're selling them for 10 and it costs 2 to make, then you just it's a nice cash multiplier. It allows you then to invest in certain things, which was a bigger requirement back then, right? You don't need a lot of equipment now. You don't need a huge cash investment. But at the same time, your revenue model has dropped way down. So instead of it being like, let's say, for some of our projects, we used to try and recoup within 6 months to a year, right? You take a marketing budget, you make some videos, you manufacture these things. Well, that just has to be stretched out to 2 or 3 years now, especially with developing artists, right? And you still have to make the same investments, but their recoupment period or the project, like earning back these sort of expenses and trying to get them net positive, it just takes longer. And so the solo artist that's out there, it makes a ton of sense for them to take huge, big risks and try different things. And there's actually it's actually really good, I think, early in your career to experiment and do these things, right? As long as it's speaking from the heart, right? But taking a lot of risks is so easy now, right? You can just release a song. Oh, did anyone respond to that? No. Okay. Try it again. That got a response. Let's really develop some visual content around that. Or we're going to develop it in concert with these releases. I think it's just so key that some of these kids are having, it's like, you used to have for a rapper, right? You have a DJ. Now it's almost like you might be self-producing your work and the DJ is a visual producer, right? And you're using these, whether it's the iPhone or this or your laptop, whatever, to just create awesome, really amazing visual content to go along with your stuff. And the production, you can produce it quicker, you can turn around quicker, you can kind of A/B test it a little bit out there. It's just a really interesting time.
Well, nowadays, producers they can't be pigeonholed because they're also able to build sales funnels via social media. They're also able to create visual content, put it on T-shirts, things like that. Podcast producers now are the old Ryan Lewises for Macklemore,
right?
In a nutshell. If you're an up-and-coming artist, go find yourself a Ryan Lewis.
Well, that speaks to team, and it speaks to what are you good at and what do you need? Where are your here's my core competencies. Okay, well, I want somebody that's a producer. I'm maybe more the personality side or whatever. So are you both? Are you Macklemore and Ryan Lewis?
We the best in a nutshell. And then I got my man Zenomir over here, my man Dominique. I wanted to bring you back.
Okay.
12 years.
Okay.
We're in the parking lot of the Metrodome. Brother Ali is on stage. This dude literally rolled up. He was in a wheelchair, and we all put him up, and we freaking We hand
You
walked.
crowd surfed?
We crowd surfed this dude on a wheelchair.
Respect.
And then before, like halfway through, Ali sees him and he's like, "Get that dude up to the front! Get that dude up to the front!" So that was the first ever sound set at the Metrodome.
Yeah.
And it was one that I always go back to that because it was so rooted, that first one. And the connections made there, and then the growth out to the well, now it's at the fairgrounds, but it was out in Shakopee right after that.
Yep.
So the growth happened and the expansion happened. What was it like throwing that first one, putting on that first one as a team?
So that's where partnership comes in real handy. I did not have much or anything to do with that first year, right? That was built off of the work that Atmosphere did to build a strong local community, right? Local fan base, local this. It's really interesting. If you look at that first lineup, it was probably 80% Rhymesayers groups. So we got to throw a big party in our backyard and try something new, right? One thing is, we've been doing the thing that, so I joined Rhymesayers about 15 years ago. They were doing it for about 10 years before me, right? So my partners and I. So the work that went into building this really strong fan base allowed for Soundset to be created, right? And then it was also this celebration of hip hop at the time, and sort of on this nice cusp of like the internet stuff really happening where people could be even more connected online. But it was to watch that first year while I was focused more on other aspects of our business, for partners to be building that with their artists it was amazing to see, and I saw the work paying off, right? I saw the bridges that we built with other artists locally, the investments that we've made into just sort of providing a space, whether it's through like Fifth Element for like all ages performances over the years, or consignments, or just whatever the work was to sort of build this local community. I think a lot of folks showed up, and I think they really showed up for that, and I think they showed up for all of the artists that were there. I think it was like this very special celebration at the time. And then I got more involved over the years in it, and it was just really interesting to see just how you evolve and how you solve problems real time. For us, the goal has always been to like do what we're good at, and then find businesses that are maybe like 1 degree away. So it's like, okay, Rhymesayers first. Well, what would be great? There's no record store that we can really super serve. You were saying, how do you fluff the sort of 20% of your fan? Like, well, what if we had our own space? What if we had our own store? And we can stock it with whatever we want. And you can have this content. You can have. This is back in the day when people would make magazines for subculture, right? And that's how you consume some of, this culture, is through these magazines that you'd have, or this music, or this vinyl, whatever. And so, okay, you take Rhymesayers, okay, a little 1 degree off, you have this record store. Okay, because it's close to our business. We're not going to open up a juice store. It's not what we do. Don't know how to do that. Food restaurant business, very hard business to be in. Let's not do that, right? Okay, so another degree away is a live music festival. Well, if we work with a lot of local artists and we're in music, why wouldn't we try and do a music festival? And it's kind of a wild thing. But to think about now, going back in we had some good partners that had done some other major festivals and stuff like that. So that's you got to find that team to build these things. I don't know if that helped answer the growth piece. Yeah,
I wanted to read something you sent me.
Okay.
And it was really, it hit me because that's why I wanted to ask if you were a glue piece.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what triggered it. Don't feel weird when I read your own words to you. A recurring theme in my work has been to figure it out and make it happen. Whatever it is, with or without the time or budget needed at the time. While there are many artists, venues, and creative outlets in Minneapolis, it wasn't a hub for the music or entertainment industry. The lack of resources, related industry, and other labels pushed us to create our own tools and to connect with creatives around the globe. Resourcefulness has served as a wonderful trait in my work. learning as I go. So that right there triggered a lot of what I wanted to ask you today.
Love it.
And where was your head at when you were writing that? Because was that like 41 weeks ago?
Yeah, I wrote it. So let's see. It was. I'm really bad with timelines.
Yep.
That's why I had to write it down.
Mm-hmm.
But before I get into that, though, you got to start a side business, man.
Mm-hmm.
You got to do hype reels for people, and just send them the file so they can have that as their alarm in the morning. You just like encouraging them, to go do this. You got the voice for it, man. You got to be this early morning hype man.
Well, that's why we're going to talk when we get off air.
Right. So the piece I am in a transition in my career, right? I've done all these things that I've wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I've spent a lot of time doing things that I wasn't necessarily that interested in, but kind of needed to be done. And so the piece was written out of wanting some reflection, wanting a mirror unto myself and a mirror unto like kind of my career, just to sort of say like, well, where am I at? And what is this next phase? Because I get clarity from that, right? And the other thing is I was kind of at a point in my life, I think this was maybe like a year-ish ago, writing this piece to reflect on the previous 15 plus years with these folks, like the Rhymesayers folks, but also, I mean, before that, in high school, throwing parties, working at record stores, like various things. Like I kind of wanted to just reflect on that time and celebrate it, right? So I'm not a person that if I go to a party, I want something to do. So I would DJ or set up the sound system. I wasn't necessarily that guy that would just go to party, right? So it wasn't in my nature necessarily to celebrate myself or to call attention to myself. I'm much more comfortable supporting other folks and building things and doing that, right? More of a behind-the-scenes situation. But this was a chance, I think, for me to get a little bit outside of my comfort space, right? And something that I ask people to do all the time, I was like, well, you know what? Maybe I can do the same thing. So a lot of those words, the resourcefulness will always be a tool for me, I think, to just continue surviving, changing, evolving. But yeah, I mean, I think the space was really one to like celebrate all of the hard work that I had put in. There's a visual side to it that I enjoy. It was an excuse for me to then share. I whittled it down from a few thousand photos down to like 60 or something like that just over the years, where it's just like interesting moments, visual moments that I captured that were probably meaningful to me and the folks around at the time, but weren't designed with a marketing end. There was no actual goal in the photos. So I also kind of liked that. So it just felt like a general celebration and a chance for me to kind of just like reflect on the work, which I think doing that process made me look it was a hard look at work that I didn't necessarily need to do or wasn't even best suited to do. So even through this process, it took me about a year and a half to like write it, because I'm not a writer. I'm not this sort of like out on the front lines kind of person. So through that time, I figured out a lot of things about where I want to go in my career and where I want to support others to take on roles that I've had in the past. And I've had a lot of success recently finding good folks that are way better than me at this particular segment of what my job was, right? So like there's a financial aspect, there's an operations aspect, there's all these other aspects to it. And I've been able to find people that are more inherently just sort of skilled in those things. And I can kind of like mentor them for a bit. And then, wow, this business can go to places I had no idea, right? So it was like celebration, reflection, build.
I think of the Great Depression,
Mm-hmm.
and I think of resourcefulness is what separated your line. If you were resourceful, you were able to thrive and then regain our economy. I think of that as the music scene as that in Minnesota. I think it's what brought us Prince. Just we are in this Midwest, we're constantly slept on, and let's be honest, man, like if it weren't for Rhymesayers, would we even really have a music scene here? And people catch themselves asking that. Mm-hmm. And it kind of goes to show when you put some minds together and you stick to it and you deal with the BS, create a team, anything can be accomplished, whether you deal with winter and 4 seasons or not. You don't need sunshine 360 days a year to be able to provide entertainment.
It's probably actually detrimental to that process. Having sunshine, why would you want to be in a basement writing? I want to be outside, right? It's, like there's a little joke that I tell people that are like, why do you live in Minnesota? Or what do you do in Minnesota? And you're like, well, look, you either get creative or you go crazy in the winter, So it's like some people, knit, some people write, some people paint, whatever it is, it's best to find a creative outlet for a few months, right? And so I think that actually encourages a lot of that work. It's interesting you said the Great Depression piece and some of these other like kind of struggles that like families have had over the years through time. Like I kind of come from farmers, and so that struggle that let's say what was the thing, the epigenetics thing you mentioned, right?
Genetic memory,
right? So I don't know if I got some of that, whatever it is, right? But like, I think some of it for me was survival. So it's resourcefulness because from the farming, ancestors that passed it down, here's how you do this, here's how you do this. You worked for your worth, right? So I was taught how to work, not necessarily how to love other people. I understood my value was there to show the fuck up, make it happen, deliver, right? Or you die. And I'm being a little, whatever, abstract here. But like, I think there's a mindset that might come from farming of, well, we got to make this work. This is how you survive. It's almost like a life and death thing, right? Which I don't exist in. But somewhere in there was my grandfather, there's these folks that had it in them or maybe experienced whatever level of that, not on the same extreme level, but like some level of it, or they were passed down. Like I think there's something very interesting to the Great Depression piece you noted, at least with me. Now with the Minnesota stuff, I think that there is something about the winter that does encourage this. For Prince, I don't fully know his story. I'm not going to ever tell his story, but there's something interesting about that because maybe in the same way that folks that I work with feel free to do a different version of this type of music or hip hop or whatever your artistic expression is, you're not pressured into the same things you might be in New York to conform to a certain commercial constraint, right? There is some freedom. It's a blessing and a curse, right? There's some freedom in not having a huge industry here or having a lot of examples or a lot of models. I think we ultimately benefited from it because of the resourcefulness. And it's not just me. I'm just playing my particular role here, but like the same thing applies to me that I said for everybody else. It's like I wouldn't be here without the team, and especially some of the artists that I get to work with. They're driving this thing. They're the ones that it's all on the line for. I'm in a much easier position in being a supportive role and not having to lead that necessarily, right? So it's like the same team stuff applies. And so the really interesting thing about Minnesota or these other, traditionally flyover spaces, wherever they exist, whether this country or others, is I think that's where a lot of interesting things come from. A lot of folks develop, harness, struggle in those spaces, and at least maybe sometimes commercially will go other places to see that. It's funny because I think back in the days, this group like Jurassic 5, I think they took off because they toured in Europe one time. They didn't hit here first. And there's a lot of you can go to certain countries in Europe and they're still loving the boom bap era hip hop sound, So it's there's all these things. But I think for Minnesota alone, it just to kind of reinforce that, it gives sometimes, without having that pressure, that commercial pressure, some freedom to experiment. Maybe that's what Prince experienced as well.
I love my favorite people, and I think a lot of our favorite people who have made it in life, they face the struggle. They're the phoenix that rose from the ashes, and then a lot of them, like comedians. What is the universal sign of theater? It's that sad face and happy face. That's the same thing with when you have to deal with climate You know, Kurt Cobain faced his demons, but he brought us brilliance. Same thing in the comedy realm. Then they all end up in LA, and then they have to put themselves in precarious situations to grab their comedy, to grab their art. And I think a lot can be said about that. And then when you have to deal with climate like we have to in the Midwest and in Minnesota, where we're ducking from tornadoes and flooding lakes, hitting our ankles, you know, we got to deal with the elements, Skye.
Yeah.
I really like to tap into purpose when I talk to people. And it's not so much, we've already hammered home, you are a glue piece, you're this giant squid pulling people together, and you're now able to, you know, help people.
I'm going to need you to transcribe that for me so I can update my bio, please.
You want to?
Yeah.
I was tripping balls in the jungle, and I went down there with a purpose to find out what my spirit animal is, because egotistically, I think it's going to be like a wolf or a lion or some shit. No, dude, like third night in, this squid rolls through the space, and your eyes are closed, but you're in another realm, right? And he's just floating. He's like, joke's on you, dude. You ever notice, Nick, how you pull people in? You're like this glue piece to introduce people and bring them. You're the Jeff Horowitz of the world, you know? You introduce people, and you put together teams, and then you guys go accomplish goals. That's your role, dude.
Right.
And then when you glue up, when you get the Gorilla Glue up and you link up with the Skye Rossies and other glue pieces, you can build an even bigger vortex. Your conglomerate just grows and grows and grows to the point you can accomplish even bigger things. And that's what I've always done, is link up with other leaders to accomplish heavy stuff. So we could say it stems from plant medicine, and I use that as a metaphor now when I meet people, because, you know, Skye Rossi he's the giant squid of Minneapolis.
I had no idea until now, man.
You big boy. So
I appreciate you sharing that, though.
Of course, and actually that's why I wanted to ask you, what would you consider to be your spirit animal? You ever thought of it?
Man, it's probably a monkey, man. I don't know. I love climbing trees. I love being versatile, you know, being able to kind of like, yeah, that's a good question. I had never thought about a spirit animal, man. That's interesting.
Just because you're versatile?
So, I don't know.
Do you have a strong upper body?
No, it's the opposite, man. I got legs. I can ride my bike for days, but I can't climb for shit anymore, you know? Yeah, no, okay, let me get back to you on that one. That's a good one.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Hit me with a text at like 11:30 p.m. in like a week and a half.
And you can then do a little post-production addition. Scott got back to me and said it's dolphins.
Okay, here's another one that I want to look at, and I want to ask you, what the hell were you plotting on in this photo from 2005?
Oh, man, dude, that's a heavy photo, right?
What were you plotting on? Because it looks like you're about to do some epic shit.
Well, I think what you were seeing on my face was, let's see, 2005. That was a really good year for us. We did a lot of good campaigns. That was a really good time. I think what you're seeing in that photo, what I was plotting on is, how the hell did I get here, right? How did anyone decide to put their trust in me to do some things that I have no background in?
Okay.
Right? So I would say I had a heavier vibe to me. I was taking things very seriously. I had to, I felt I had to guarantee outcomes, and just it has to fucking happen, whatever it is. And I think there was like a heaviness about that reflecting back, I'm in a totally different, different place now, but I think I see that in my face. I see the seriousness. I see the guardedness. I see I'm trying to project, sort of a confident, strong vision of whatever's going on. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's definitely out of my control at that time. But I think probably, 2005 was a very big transitional year for us. You know, like that's where you started seeing a lot of the changes just around the corner with like a lot of the different formats and distribution models and stuff like that. So I was probably in my head a lot about how the hell are we going to pull this off. still to this day.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
How and I had to tell, okay, so we had our Link and Drink panel last week with music industry one. And we had kind of a clash between two of the panelists, Chazen and Pharaoh, regarding Chazen.
I think I know Zach Chazen.
Zach Chazen.
Who's the other person?
Pharaoh, he's an artist, musician.
Oh, yeah.
He was on the show recently as well. But Chazen was all about faking it till you make it. Like, dude, like we're all pretenders, right? And then Pharaoh's like, no, I believe you work hard, you get in your hours, you master something in you, which is true. But I had to kind of play the devil's advocate and be like, wait a minute. We're all a bunch of frauds walking around pretending like we know what we're talking about. My life is asking people questions and then empathizing and providing insight in any which way it comes. And I think it goes to show on both sides where, yes, we should be put in our hours, be confident, know what we're talking about if we're a professional. Yeah. But at the same time, like, let's not get it twisted. We're all a bunch of bullshitters.
When you kind of recap what they're saying, I kind of heard them saying the same thing. At least my version of faking it till I make it. Right? There's a certain risk threshold that is too high, right, to fake it, right? But I think there are certain things where it's like if I think you are outside of your comfort zone, that's the faking it that I'm talking about, right? So you're outside of your comfort zone because maybe your interests are taking you there and you want to take this leap in your career or you want to do something adjacent to it. Well, there's a lot of value in that. And I think whatever it is, it kind of doesn't matter what you call it, but it's about permissiveness, I think, with yourself to be yourself, right? And that's I think that's the cosmic joke in life is that there's, the real goal here is just to be as close to who you are and be able to share that with other people as possible. And so from a career standpoint, I think I don't know what this necessarily is, but this really interests me and I want to provide some value. There's plenty of people that are in Zach's line of work or whatever, like horrible promoters. Horrible. And they have no good intent, right? There's a lot of really just, and it used to be a lot more as that industry gets more corporate. It's harder to it's harder to exist as a bad promoter. But like, there's lots of people that fake it and they're bad people, or they have bad intent to just play a part or play a role. I think that's a lot different than that. So I actually kind of interesting enough hear them saying the same thing. It's like, yeah, put in the work, learn as you go. It's more of a learn as you go thing for me, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, progress, not perfection, right?
Well, I don't think perfection exists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's something that I think I've learned through time, and maybe it's just having a child, right? Where I just learned that I can strive for perfection all I want, but it's knowing in my core that it doesn't exist. So one, I'm trying. Two, I'm giving it my all because I set intent and I see to it that goals are achieved. But at the same time, still being willing to throw up my hands and tell the universe I don't have the answers. And it's amazing where good things start to happen when we just say, fuck it, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Doesn't mean I'm going to quit trying, but I am not in control of this ship.
Yeah, there's an extreme side to that, right? Let me try and get a quotable for you right now. Presence, not perfection, right? So if you are present with your child, if you are present with this task and you're not striving for perfection, a lot of times that'll get in the way. I've worked with plenty of artists over the years, whether it's visual or music, and they're just, it's not done yet. It's not done yet. It's not done yet. But when they know, you know what I mean? They're present with the work. They're trying to get it there. And then ultimately, it's never going to be probably perfect, but it might feel right. And as long as you're present with yourself and that work, things are going to turn out pretty good.
Presence, not perfection.
There you go. That's I'm going for the sound bite.
The gold. No, that we're going to have that in quote right up top.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's perfect because it's
working on my stand-up.
No, it's money because when you're talking with someone whether they're there or not.
Oh, yeah.
With you, and tells me, because, you and I and all of us, we meet with a lot of people on a weekly basis. You're always having meetings. And nowadays, if you have your earbuds in and you're doing a phone conference, you can tell if they're scrolling on their phone or not.
No, totally.
You totally know. Yeah. And what do you really get? You're wasting your time at that point. Are we going to get anything out of this meeting?
Yeah.
And then in the creative process is very tough when you're compiling teams, who's present and who's not.
It is. It's interesting. So the person that introduced us, Jeff Horowitz, he's a person that I learned how to be very present through our friendship, right? And to be present for him at certain times. Another person, Sameh Wadi, just learning to be present with these people, right? Like these people in your life, these people that you care about, the whatever it is, it's sort of a less is more, but then slowing down, so you're able to slow down and be sort of present for folks. And that also goes, I think, for yourself. Yeah.
Quality over quantity, baby.
Yeah.
I'm going to read another one of your things, dude. Just because you're so motivating.
I'm waiting for where I get to throw the joke. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, here it comes.
I'm sorry, man. I'm working on my stand-up. I'm trying to polish this up.
My adventure in music began with no formal training, but plenty of on the job. I learned to work hard from an early age, creating value for those around me as a problem solver and connector. The enjoyment of seeing artists achieve their goals gave me purpose. I went from throwing house parties in high school, promoting shows, formalizing a loose collective into a record label, working at cheapo record store, or on projects with Life Sucks, Die Magazine, and Burlesque Design, to collaborating with other local artists. Looking back, it feels like the perfect mix of experience to prepare for the roles I've created over the years at Rhymesayers.
Yeah.
That's where you say it.
Man, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Dude, I've had countless authors on my show, right?
Yeah.
And I've never read them their own material.
Oh, you got to do that more. Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm sure their writing's a lot better than mine, so it'll be easier for them to listen to. I'm like, God damn, is that where you put a period?
Don't incentivize me because I'll freaking do it. I'll weird them out.
Have some fun with it, man.
It's so interesting to hear you philosophically speak about your own life in like a memoir form.
Yeah.
And it's like instilling, what I got out of it is Skye instilling that you're proud of yourself. You've done a good job. And because there does come a time where we owe it to ourselves to look back at what made us and give ourselves a pat on the back and applaud to let us know we're on the right path.
Yeah. Well, a healthy person, I think, does that. Mm-hmm. Somebody that's not just constantly. It's really hard out here. Life's not always easy. It's nice to reflect back and be kind to yourself and the others, that are close to you. Yeah.
Did you give a slow clap to Atmosphere when Life Gives You Lemons, Paint That Shit Gold came out?
I've been slow clapping from the beginning. From the beginning, Sean and Anthony in that group are just two very encouraging, supportive, and driven people. They're great examples of having vision and putting in the work to see that vision through, and allowing, I think, for imperfection in the work so that you can have that team around it. Allowing others to participate. Yeah. Oh, I've been giving them a slow clap. That campaign, particularly, they allowed me to play different roles than I normally would. So I found there's a local firm called McVoy, and we actually the FE that's sitting behind you is a big deal in the ad world. It's not something that we're necessarily aware of, but the digital campaign that they kind of put behind that thing, and we kind of collaborated on it. Fucking murdered. It was awesome. At the time, we were putting together technologies that hadn't been done, and it worked. It was just super interesting. It was super fun. It's a huge, more than a slow clap, maybe. A lot of high fives and pats on the back. For that particular campaign just stands out to me because I was able to participate in some other ways that I wasn't previously. Those are my first real deeper dives into that side of it.
That album changed the game for music in Minnesota.
How so?
Well, just because of how it was done from a production standpoint as well as marketing standpoint. And that was, I believe, they were probably working on it during the first Sound Set campaign.
And then, because I remember I wore the shirt, When Life Gives You Lemons, you paint that shit gold.
Which one of them? We made 3 different ones. What's in front of it?
God damn.
Was it one that had lemons on it?
Yep.
Or was it the one that had the big script?
Big
where
script.
The shit was printed in a...
In cursive. Yep.
Oh, yeah. It took right to get that registration right.
Really?
That was a good one. Yeah.
I got made fun of
Oh, the perfect.
for wearing that shirt to the same festival that group put on. I got made fun of.
Trendsetter, man. That's what people do now.
Yeah. I wasn't, dude, like that. I remember when that album came out. This is the cool thing about music and art. You can always go back to where you were when you heard it the first time. I'll never forget when I heard College Dropout, where I was. I was on my boy's couch eating a Chipotle burrito for the first time too, might I add, listening to drug dealing just to get by. And then we took this trip out to Philadelphia and we listened that album the entire time, When Life Gives You Lemons. And it was just, I think it's great how you used to be great.
Yeah,
you know?
That's a really great way to listen to music. That's
One long trip.
We were kind of talking about singles and albums and stuff like that. Like, I think that would be ideal for any artist to be able to have their music listened to in that way, right? Like front to back on a road trip. I had a similar experience. I bought an Outkast album, and this is back in the day when like CDs were like $18. But I was driving a friend's car back from San Francisco to Minnesota. Never been to California in my life. Never been on a road trip in my life. 21. Bought this CD. Listened to it back to back probably way too many times. You know what I mean? But it was an amazing way to experience that. And the artists that they are, produced an album. And it's really interesting to me how you can call this all technology. Records, CDs, it's all technology. It's just different formats of the thing. It's the container of the creative, right? So the CD just defined, well, what's the max amount of data you can put on the CD? That shaped what we perceive an album should be, right? Well, what is the value? Well, it needs to be at least 50 minutes, or it needs to be at least this, or an EP is this long, or it's this long. And a lot of those things were shaped by the format that they were in, right? Even the album format back on vinyl, when you'd have to turn sides, there was a very specific, well, at least for some artists, there was a very specific song order, and how did things transition, and how do you do this? And
Pink Floyd was masters at it.
Right.
A and B side.
Right. So that, and you know what I mean? And then the cassette changes that. Well, shit. And then when you get a cassette player that can do the auto flip or whatever, I can't remember what it was called, right? You can play it back. And now I'm dating myself. But like, you know, that changes how the album can be listened to front to back, and just like makes it more, it just changes what your listening experience is. And I think the very attentive artists know the format, right? It's like know your audience, right? And so now that you have unlimited, what do you want? You know, it's just linear. You can just go however far you want to go, or you can put it in a visual thing, like the Frank Ocean visual album. I don't know the name of it. But
Bring back Frank.
You know,
Bring back Frank.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that where it's like it's beautiful because artists are able to produce probably in more ways than they would intend or be creative with that format. The thing now, though, is like song length is getting shorter because of streaming. That's because, well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's like digestibility. Also, the shorter the song is, you want to listen to it again and again, you get more streams. Drives revenue up. It's actually
$2.59.
Play. Right. Yeah, I don't know. There's like a new average length of a song, and it's much shorter than it was like a few years ago.
Yeah, 4.5 down to 320, now 259, and it's kind of like the Instagram algorithm, 259 seconds. Don't go longer, otherwise we got to transmit to IGTV.
I love that you know that, because I thought I was the only nerd person out here paying attention to that. So that's great.
We are soulmates.
Glad that you're.
Didn't you know this, Skye?
I didn't, man. I didn't know about the squid thing either. You know?
All because of that San Francisco trip. Now this explains it. Why you'll never stop apologizing to Mrs. Jackson.
Right. Yeah. I'm saying that was a hell of a song, man. You know?
I'm sorry, Miss Jackson.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because like the Kendrick Lamar's, where you can pinpoint between someone who's just doing it to do it and an actual artist, in my eyes, because they create these stories, these projects, kind of like When Life Gives You Lemons, where it's just the whole thing. you need to listen to it from start to scratch. You're not going straight to song 4 or song 6 because that's the one you heard and they just don't relate. That's why I love the camps where like that camp, they expect it out of all their artists. And it's really interesting.
You're saying like a TDE?
Yeah, TDE, where they kind of expect that storytelling nature out of their camp. Create a project, bro. Don't just hit us with singles. Who else has done that? What's that? Oh, dude, he's really good too. But there are these artists where they expect it out of their camp, their team. And that's where it's like, it's the leapfrog effect. And I like that because, you know, you had, Slug brought Casanova on one of his records last year. And it was really interesting because it is that leapfrog. It's like the assist, man. It's like, no, dude, go out and get it. Let's set you up. Do this chorus for us.
Yeah, that's something that I don't know if Atmosphere necessarily gets enough credit for. He's not looking for the credit. But, like, that's a real artist development move, and that's a thing that's allowed a lot of the artists that we work with directly to succeed. Is you make room for the younger generation, right? And you support, whether it's doing feature work or generally being supportive or on Twitter. You know, I learned a lot about local music from what Sean is, you know, posting about, and so I think there's a lot of that happens. It's a really beautiful thing, and I think artist development used to be a thing that label did or other artists did, but like the majority of the folks that we work with, they know who they want to then bring on the road and kind of sort of help usher, you know what I mean? Or it's like a POS does a few records with us and then he does his own tours and then he's working, you know, like they've got Dessa and all these other artists that they want to go tour up and package in a different way and do these things. It's like, it's a beautiful thing to see, you know, where it's also really interesting at the shows seeing what, you know, like for, using Amster as an example again, like him bringing out like a Dem Atlas or Ali back in the day. Well, which folks then sort of go away with them, right? Oh, like, you know what? I had no idea who Dem Atlas was. I love his music now. It's just really interesting to see what happens at those shows and seeing how people react. The live music part of this art form is so interesting because you're seeing in real time how people react to this music. Who's crying to this? Who's connecting to this? And going back to your thing about like you feel like you can see artists that are doing it for this reason or that reason. Another way to look at it would be those artists just aren't telling a story that resonates with you or your experience or how you relate to things. You know,
through my own eyes, that's it.
Right. Yeah. Or ears. You know, there's just a lot of things where it's like, fuck around. But like, there's a lot of really interesting things that happen to that because like even you and I could have a conversation about any particular artist and I would just have possibly a totally different understanding or reaction or even like belief in what that song was about, right? And there's this really interesting thing that happens online a lot now where it's like, a particular example might be a better one was we did a new music video for an old Atmosphere song, Sunshine, one of their more popular songs.
Sunshine, sunshine, oh, let it shine.
Yeah, it's a super feel-good vibe. There's all these like pieces in it. We went
even the birds were bumping.
Yeah, you know, like there's these wonderful visuals in there, and so we kind of went playful with the video. Sean wasn't in it intentionally. You know, like there's these things. It's this older song. Most of the comments on that video were totally different than comments on a normal video, right? And it was, I never saw the song this way. This is not the visual that I had. This was my and then what was interesting is that people were like, I saw these guys, Sean and Ant, riding bikes. Why is there this other you know, it's like, it's just really interesting what, you know, music's emotional value is as high as it ever was. That's not ever going to change. Music is just going to be a thing that people respond to on a very high emotional, some people on a very high emotional level. The financial value of that is decreasing, right? So you're seeing people, if you're a Spotify or whatever consumer, you have to spend $120 a year to have access to almost all of the music ever released ever, right? Reasonable in my eyes, because if you think about how much you would have to spend on an individual CD in the past, right? That's a totally different financial consideration. You would have to spend thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to have the same access, right? So the financial value to a lot of people when it comes to music is going down, but their emotional value is just as high. And that's just a really interesting thing, that no matter what the format is of music, it just doesn't matter. It's just kind of going back to the other conversation we were having about what artists are using the format in an interesting way, and how do you do it in such a way that then is able to translate to whatever that next form of it is in a somewhat reasonable way. Like, you can't future-proof this stuff. You got to build for what's now, but having some mindset in not getting so caught up in that current trend, like the shortest song thing or whatever, like, well, you know what? If you made songs that were less than a minute, you could put them up on Instagram, you could put them up on Feed, and it would translate a little bit better to stories. But that might not be the right way to do music, right? Can you actually deliver what you would want to in that time frame? So I think there's some things where people just need to be mindful of that.
I really like that example you used about the Sunshine video, because I'm guilty of it, where I heard a song initially with rose-colored glasses on, saw the visuals, same thing. And then I relay back to it, say even a decade later. Dude, like, if I went back and listened to Country Grammar, I'm going to listen to it differently because of how where wordplay has been taken to nowadays in 2019. Even listening to, I was driving down to a wedding in Chicago a few weeks ago, listening to the Slim Shady LP. It's just apples to oranges compared to where Eminem's wordplay is nowadays. And it's not a bad thing. It's just progression.
Did you have, though, an emotional or a visual sort of like throwback? Because I think one thing that can happen for certain people with music is like, yo, you listen, I'm the real, please stand up, whatever. Like, if that was an impactful song to you or whatever the right example is here, like, I mean, were you transported back to like where you were, like emotionally in that space?
Absolutely, because I got to tell my wife stories about driving to Boy Scout camp, hearing about Eminem murdering his baby mama, and it's like, I'm an 11-year-old. Why am I hearing this? Why did Adam Sawinski's older brother go get this CD for us from Best Buy?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You're like, this dude's pretty cool, but also what's going on here? Yeah.
And there was a moment in time where like they just... it was pointless to go buy the censored versions of Eminem's albums because half of the songs were just bleeped out. So it was pointless to go get them. So you had to get your elder statesman to go. Like my older sister, I wasn't asking her to go get me beer. I was asking her to go get me, derogatory albums. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You can't go to Walmart for those records.
But it was the obsession to the emotion that music brought us. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's always been. Phil Collins, In the Air of the Night, right? In the Air of the Night or In the Air of the Night, whatever it is. Eminem's song, talking about that song in his song, like gave it a whole new meaning when people went back to it, right. Where he saw the guy who watched a kid drowned in the front row of his concert. He saw him firsthand. Like that gives whole new meaning to that song. And it's so cool that musical form can leapfrog itself and give new meaning to other music. Just like I keep going back to Eminem, how he used, 2 or 3 albums ago, he used a lot of these old classic rock songs in his newer music. They would just chop up the beat and remaster, but it was so interesting because it gave us a new appreciation to music that was being made back then, and vice versa.
Sure. What was the Frank mixtape, the Nostalgia Ultra thing? Like, I mean, that probably introduced this very young audience to some very, what you'd call classics or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things. I think that's a really interesting thing for, like, hip hop specifically, around the sampling and around the sort of like it's almost like a genre that's like built for the current space and technology and how you can adapt and how you feature on songs and how you share music and how you can like build audiences. Mm-hmm. It's I think it is somewhat influenced by that too. A lot of these younger tech folks that are sort of driving these platforms have been influenced, I think, heavily by hip hop. I think it was like, not only was that music disrupted by tech, but I think tech folks were inspired by how people collaborated, whatever you want to call it, cross-platform, a long time ago.
I have 2 more questions before I let you go.
Sounds good.
Have you ever gone crate digging with Ant?
I used to work at a record store that Ant would crate dig at, so I wouldn't say I was invited along.
You were his plug, though.
Yeah. Oh, hell yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Nah, I would. You work. Where I was working at Cheapo. You know what folks like, right? Ant would come in, Sadiq would come in, Sean would come. Whoever these folks are, lots of other. So this is how I got onto a lot when I was DJing. Onto a lot of like parties and stuff because folks would come in, and this is, you didn't have Twitter, you didn't know what other people were doing necessarily, but you just get to talking. Why is this kid that's my age, I'm getting $4.25 an hour working at Cheapo, why is this other kid in here shopping for these records? Like, what is this person doing? And you just say, hey, so DJ, what are we doing here? Is this just easy listening for you right now? What are we doing? And you just I end up meeting a lot of the folks that I even still work with today, Ant, Slug, Sadiq included in that space. You know what I mean? And Ant would be like, hey, if you ever see records like this, just, let me know. Whatever. Like next time I'm in, I don't know if you can call us to the side. I don't know how that all works. But yeah, so I went, I've never been crate digging with Ant, but I know that he, Plain Old Bill, the Atmosphere's DJ, and Sean go crate digging a lot of places that they go on tour. I haven't been fortunate enough to go with them, but I would say the early experience at Cheapo was probably as close as I'm going to get.
Well, I mean, that's the Mecca in my eyes.
Yeah.
That's ground zero.
It was. There was a lot of good stuff came through Cheapo. I bought a lot of weird CDs and weird vinyl and discovered a lot of music that I never would have known. That was my Spotify.
Yeah, and with records, that was a whole different ball game because, like, I'll never forget, man, when I conned my mom into buying me Shaq's first album. Okay. I was obsessed with Shaq, dude.
Okay.
And
I didn't know. Why do I not know he had an album?
Dude, this is around the time of like Kazam, the Orlando Magic, like it was Shaq, right?
Yeah,
he was just a big enigma, right? Took over the world, and every other word was an F-bomb, and I'd be in there dunking on his basketball hoop that I had in his room with his number 32 on my chest, like just going to town. My mom overheard it. I wasn't swearing, but she could hear the music. She took that shit back to Sam Goody so quick. Quick.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't even think she cared if she got her money back. She still just brought it back.
Want to make a point. Yeah. I didn't see a parental advisory sticker on here, or maybe if I did, whatever. Hey,
we got problems.
Sounds like Shaq was ahead of his time, man. He's doing merchandise. He's got you watching him play, and he's got the music side. He had
a video game.
Early.
Kazam, the video game. It was like Mortal Kombat on an EpiPen, basically. Like, it was not on steroids, we'll put it that way. It was the Barn Burner edition. And then he had the movie, too. So it was like, there's just marketing ploy on steroids. Killed it, right?
Smart.
But it was brilliant. But if you bring it back to records, like, dude, you're not going to go return a records. That's nostalgic. Or You're keeping that, dude. I deal with old heads and their Led Zeppelin collections, and be hard-pressed. They don't care what kind of money you're offering them. They're not trying to flip those things.
Right.
I want to keep them forever.
I've met some folks that do the audiophile thing, and they're not even... They're like... Maybe this is a different thing, but they're essentially taking very high-quality recordings off of vinyl rips or reel-to-reel rips, and then sort of doing some audio magic to them, and then they're keeping it in like a lossless digital format, but like, I don't know if you're Plex for like videos. It's like an online kind of server thing that you can have access to on your phone and stuff. These guys have like terabytes of, remastered, unmastered. Yeah, you probably get it's a little video server, but I think you do music on it too. But these guys are doing this crazy lossless. I mean, it's better than vinyl because they're getting. And then what they're doing is they're sharing on their own like little networks. So Led Zeppelin live recording from X, and they got the guy that was actually running the sound recording to give them the tracked out version, and then they paid somebody to master. This audio game is crazy.
That's huge in the Grateful Dead community too.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I know a couple heads who do that, and it's because Grateful Dead never played the same set twice, so they love it because it's like finding Easter eggs.
That's great.
Oh my God, 1978, Haight Ashbury, da da da. You couldn't even imagine. It's like it's literally just a wanderlust of Easter eggs because they never played the same set.
Or there's this little ad lib or this little story that they decide to tell on stage. That's really cool.
Yes, it is. I haven't asked this question since I was tripping balls with Dennis McKenna in Costa Rica last November.
Sounds like a good time to ask this question. I'm glad that you're relating this experience to that experience.
Well,
that's a good. Yeah, fuck it. Yeah, I'll take it.
Dude, my life is just this line of like, who do I get to talk to today?
Okay.
It doesn't matter because we just need to relay everything together.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Where it's just like nothing matters.
Okay.
Because I know where I stand. I know who I am, what I represent. Where it's like, who cares, dude? I'm a free agent.
Okay.
We're rocking.
Okay.
I don't know where that related to, but I want to know your 5 favorite greatest inventions of all time.
Shit.
We start at number 5.
Oh man, it's got to go up.
Choose wisely.
Camera. Yeah.
Now you know that means you can't say cell phone at number 2.
Oh man. Well, I mean, you could say.
I'm just making up rules.
Yeah. No, I like it. I mean, I think like it's invention.
Think wisely, my good sir.
See, here's the thing: is now I got to put some guardrails on this thing.
Okay,
right? So like, do you know what I'm saying? Because
dude,
like
Dr. Dre's my number 3.
The 5 as an invention, as a human,
human invention. Look at everything he brought us.
Sure.
Dude.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Hey, that series, Define, was dope.
It's incredible.
Of course, he and Jimmy produced
Game
it.
changer.
It's a great series.
Jimmy Iovine is such a hustler.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That beat steel they made. Oh my God.
Oh yeah,
it's insane.
He's a fantastic deal maker. So
and Plan B is, the birth control pill is my number 2, I believe. Yeah.
So you're all okay. So we're talking all of
dude. Sweatpants. No, birth control is my number 1.
Yeah.
Sweatpants are my number 2.
Okay. I was thinking more like, okay, for the greater human good. Are we talking like?
I mean, the internet could be number 4.
We're talking about mills. You know what I mean? That like, what Minnesota was founded. Like how you're milling grain and shit. You know what I mean? Damn, this is good. Okay, so how about this? I'll take it back to my own. So I was a computer nerd. So whether it was programming basic in elementary school, like those Apple II, the green screen computers, I gotta say computers. I love, the ability. I love what it allows us to do. It's to me, computers and cell phones, whether we know it, are an extension of us, right? There's this sort of piece that it just allows us to explore the greater good, if you choose, or the greater bad, whichever direction you want to go to. So that's, computers is up there. And I'm gonna give you a long-winded answer. I'd say, computers, cameras, sugar, donuts. I'm very happy that somebody figured out how to make things very sweet. I have a huge sweet tooth. I'm going to put pasta up there as an invention. Yeah, fuck it. I feel, okay, now I like where this is going. Pasta's number 1, man. It's over. You know what I mean? Pasta's, I'm sorry. Number 1 and number 2.
What kind of sauce on the pasta?
I mean, we're going with a light tomato base.
Okay.
Oil with the tomato base. So one thing that's very important is like music has a very high emotional value, right? People love connecting over the music that they like. It helps me understand who you are. You've talked a lot about Eminem. That informs me about, Grateful Dead, these things, right? Like it informs potentially who you are, or at least some reflection or some connection to that, right? So to me, music is this big thing, but to me, food is an even greater thing, right? If you're able to sit down and share a meal with somebody, or if you're saying, like, let's say you go out, we go grab a bite. If you're like, nah, man, these are my French fries, I know what I need to know about you, right? I mean, like, I'm not fucking with you. Like, it's over. Business done, right? You know, like for me, the way I grew up, how I related to food, it was somewhat from a place of lack. So then now in my life now, it's about sharing food, and it just goes down these more sort of intimate levels of cooking for somebody is more of even a connective way. So there's ways that I think like food kind of connects us. You know what I mean? So that's why I'm going pasta as number one, man. It's a connector. There's certain foods that I think are, I don't want to say universal, but maybe it's, you know, noodles of some form, right? Cross cultures. You know, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody that's really mad at pizza. You know, it's really mad at these things. But yeah, I'd say pasta's number
Angry
one.
as hell eating pizza.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Jeff Horowitz.
Yeah.
Why'd you introduce me to him?
Yeah. Well, see, here's why we know Jeff's a good person, because he doesn't eat pizza with a fork and knife. You know, that's a warning sign. It's a danger.
I don't trust anybody who eats pizza with a fork.
It's just there's these things. If you're not sharing your fries, and if we're not, you know, sharing a pizza, it's a problem.
Do you dip your pizza in ranch?
Not anymore. I used
I like
to
where
work,
this is going.
Yeah, not anymore. I used to work, so I've worked a lot of different jobs. I used to work in food, and so all the way from doing, you know, waiting to cooking to managing certain things. And so I used to work at this place called Paisanos. It was on Selby and Dale over in St. Paul. I grew up in St. Paul. And, you know, you're hungry. You get to make like a little staff meal. You get to make like one shift meal, whatever. And so I just took the dough, put it in the oven by itself. It grew, you know, up into like some like par-baked bread. And I made this ranch dipping pizza, I called it. Was like an off-menu item there that you would get this kind of like, you know, 85% baked thing. It was very doughy, very like kind of moist. And you'd like tear it off and do the dip. It's like when you get like a spinach dip in a bread, right? Like, I don't know if that was a thing that you've experienced, but you essentially hollow out like a bowl. You put the spinach dip, throw it on top, you tear it out, you dip. It was my version of that. So now, you know, the older I get, the slower my metabolism gets, the less ranch I'm getting. If that makes sense.
No ranch, dude.
Yeah.
No ranch. And my wife, she's still got to graduate from that. We're trying to get her on the blue cheese kick. We'll see.
Okay.
You know, a progress, not perfection.
Yo, man. Hey, late July makes a really good ranch flavored chip that might be a nice step away. It's like how you can get off soda by drinking LaCroix.
We about to wean this woman.
Well, hey, man, it's just about offering choices. If she wants to go there with it, you can get there.
I appreciate you, bro.
All right, man. Thanks for the time. Peace.
That's my city. I love rolling around my city. He got me feeling like oh, he got me feeling like oh, man, you talking about my city. It's true. All of the beautiful people in my city. Oh, what a view. What a view. Ain't a place on earth quite just like this. If I had a little trouble, would you be there for me? Man, it's been hot all summer. What a sight to see. I am you and you are me. So can it be happy? We got a right to be. This city really got a hold of me. I've had love. I've lost love. I feel strong. When I start looking around my city, I love rolling around my city. He got me feeling like like oh, man, you talking about my city. From the hot to the cold, from the cops to control. Better stop, get a shot for the skin that is brought to the road. Better love your neighbors. At least we talk about justice. Family, sisters, and brothers. We will stand for each other. We are the change that we need. Ooh, I belong here. You got that, bitch? I've had love, I've lost love, I feel strong. When I start looking around my city, I love rolling around my city. He got me feeling like, oh, he got me feeling like living in a song, what I love about it, what I have love without it. What do I love about my home? If we living in a song, what I love about it, what I have love without it. What do I love about my home? If we living in a song, what I love about it, what I have love without it.